If you're thinking about whitewashing wood or a piece of furniture, this video is one you should watch. Hi, I'm Jenny from Refresh Living, and today I'm going to talk all about whitewashing wood. I'm going to show you a few different techniques for how to whitewash wood and also show you what it looks like on different types of wood. So I've got 5 different species of wood here, and I'm going to show you what all 3 of the techniques look like on those different pieces of wood. Plus, I've got some stained wood and some finished wood to show you what it looks like on a piece of wood that has been stained versus a piece of wood that has been stained and clear coated. All right, stay tuned. I've got all my tricks for whitewashing. I'll be comparing these techniques on 5 different types of wood: oak, poplar, 2 different types of pine, and cedar. A quick PSA, if you prefer to read over watch, you'll find a link to the full post on how to whitewash wood in the description below. Plus, I'd really appreciate it if you hit that like button if you found any bit of this useful. It sure helps me out. All right, let's get going. We're starting with the most popular whitewashing technique out there, the diluted paint method. We're going to mix 1 part paint with 2 parts water. When choosing your paint, it's best to get a flat, matte, or even an eggshell finish. Other than that, you just want it to be white. After it's mixed up well, I find that a whisk or a fork works really well for that. Apply some to your paintbrush and then lightly brush it over the surface of the wood. You're going to let it sit for about 30 seconds. Now, the time here does change the look of the whitewash, so the longer you let it sit, the more the paint can penetrate through the wood and it gives a whiter finish. However, you want to make sure not to let the paint dry on the wood, because in the next step, we're going to wipe off the paint with a clean, lint-free rag. If the paint starts to dry, it makes it really difficult to wipe off and can give a really strange finish. Now, after you wipe off the wood, if it's not light enough, let it dry a little and then do another coat. Every time you do this, it's going to whiten and lighten it up quite a bit. We'll take a closer look at this later, but this is how it looks after 1 coat of the whitewashed with diluted paint. Method number 2 is a pre-made white stain. So Varthane, Minwax, all main stain manufacturers create a white stain in both oil-based and water-based now. I'm using an oil-based stain here because I wanted to test out the difference between oil-based versus the water-based paint method that I used in the first step. To use a white stain, you will first mix it up really well. After mixing, you'll use a paintbrush to apply it in 1 coat on top of the wood. Then you're going to let it sit. As far as time goes, oil-based stains do need more time to penetrate the wood than something like a water-based paint. Usually it's recommended to let it sit for about 2 or 3 minutes and then to wipe off the excess stain. For my test, I left it on for about a minute to kind of mimic the amount of time I left on for the paint. Now, no matter what, the longer you leave it on, the more the stain will penetrate and the more color that will penetrate the wood. In this case, the longer you leave it on, it will be more white. Of course, after your first coat, if it's too light and showing too much of the wood grain, apply a second coat and you'll be amazed at how much it lightens up the wood. Technique number 3 is a fun one and also quite messy. It's called a pour and scrape method, and in this case we're just going to use regular white paint. No need to dilute it here. You'll pour it on top of the wood and then you'll use a plastic scraper to scrape off the wood. A couple things to consider if you're planning on using this technique. First, it's going to waste a lot of paint. You'll drag quite a bit of paint off the surface that just ends up getting thrown away. Second, it's best to use this on a horizontal and completely flat piece of wood. It will not work well if you're trying to do like a vertical wall, let's say, that's up and down. You'll have such a mess on your hands. Also, it doesn't work so well in any details or grooved edges. You can see I was using a piece of casing for my first 2 examples, and it was really hard to get the whitewash in there unless I grabbed a rag. This technique is really neat whenever you have a piece of wood that has imperfections or grooves or knots or raised graining. It creates a really neat effect. I'll give you a closer look at that in just a bit after we look at this next and final technique for whitewashing, which I like to call the wax and wipe method. In this technique, we're going to use a piece of wax, a candle, a white crayon, anything works here, and we're going to rub it on different parts of the wood. The places that you put the wax are the places where the paint is not going to stick. Then we'll paint on white paint across the wood. You can use regular white paint here or watered down white paint if you're looking for a more transparent look. Once it dries, you'll use a rag to wipe away at the wood, and the places where you left the wax will come off on your rag. You can also go over this with 220 or 320 grit sandpaper as well to pull off a little more of the paint for a more distressed look. This technique really only works on pieces of wood that have a lot of variation. Think old, distressed, pallet type wood. It doesn't work if you use it on a piece of like flat pine. It just ends up looking stupid, which is why I didn't use it on all of the test pieces. Clearly, there's no one right way to whitewash wood. They'll give slightly different finishes, but in the end, they're all going to create a pretty similar look. So it kind of just depends on the look you're going for and the technique you want to use. Now, we've got one more comparison coming up. This is the one I probably get the most questions on and wanted to give you a visual comparison. I use the diluted paint method to whitewash 5 different pieces of wood in different stain colors. I wanted to show you the difference of how whitewash looks over stain. Plus, I put a clear coat over the top of the wood and I left the bottom unfinished. And you can see applying whitewash over a clear coat is going to give you a different look than if you're applying it over the wood. Generally speaking, if you're applying whitewash over raw wood, the white is going to be able to penetrate into all of that graining and all of the pores much more, giving more of a white effect than if you went over finished wood. Believe it or not, this video only scratches the surface on the topic of how to whitewash wood. I have a full post with a ton of more information that I'll link in the description below. As always, thanks so much for watching. Follow along for tips on how to decorate your home without buying new or spending a lot of money.